Hey guys, check it out. I was going to do a finishing 101 type video, but the camera on my phone screwed up, messed up. For some reason I couldn't record, so I had to run it through its little security thing and blah blah blah. Kind of irritating. I think it's time for a new phone. I've had this one for a couple of years at least, and it's starting to have a lot of issues. But what I want to cover here is the basics of finishing, really. Different prep, different techniques, things, and so forth. So your finishing actually begins with the first cut you make. If you're ripping plywood and you're getting nothing but chips, well, that's going to show through in your finish. If you don't sand anything, it's going to show through on your finish. So it really is all about prep, guys. Prep, and more prep. Now I run a Freud type blade, or a Freud blade, on my table saw, which is meant for ripping and cross cutting. It's not a bad blade. It does what it's supposed to do, but it is getting a little dull. So occasionally on plywood, when you're ripping it down, what'll happen is it'll loosen up the veneer on the plywood a little bit. So when you're sanding it, sometimes you get some splinters. Well, if that happens, like if your sanding pad catches it, what will happen is, if I can find my other sanding pad, which I cannot, so let's take one of these old ones. So when you're sanding it, a lot of times it'll catch one of those splinters and break it off. Well, if that happens, save that piece, glue it on, and then tape it down with some good tape, some good sticky tape. Now I use this stuff from Uline. This is it's basically like a packaging tape. I use it for all my pyrotechnic stuff, but it works really well. So particularly on this cabinet here, I had, well, maybe 15 spots that did that because I wasn't being patient enough. And so I ended up fixing it, and then, well, of course I had to have patience to wait. And that's rough sometimes. So, yeah, your finishing actually begins with your first cut. So if your stuff isn't square, and when you assemble it, if your joints and stuff aren't flush, it's just going to add to it. So I pre-sand everything before I assemble, all the way up to 220 when I'm using pine and mahogany underlayment. It's about the finest I need to go. I'm not building a high-end heirloom type furniture here with these, so there's no need to go any further. But if I was going to build, say, a nice cherry chest or some nightstands or something like that, I would sand up to at least 320 minimum, maybe 400. And then depending on the finish I was going to do, like if I was going to do a hand rubbed finish, I would sand even more, and then progressively sand with my much finer grits as I do my finish work to bring out the luster. Now I doweled everything, made sure everything was square, all my joints and butt joints, they're all nice and flush. Now when sanding vertical grain versus horizontal grain, after you spray on your first seal coat, it's real important to... Honey, would you take the camera? Hold on a second here, guys. Let me grab a sanding sponge. So what you want to do here, here's the sanding sponge I use. These are 3M. These are pretty nice. About an 80 grit and probably about a 150 grit or so in that area. A little finer than that. But what I like to do is I take a tape like this. This stuff is sticky. But what I do is, on the rough side here, I take the tape and protect that edge, or cover that edge. Kind of like that. So, and I'm not going to do any sanding because this is the final coat on this, but so when I'm sanding the horizontal grain, my sanding sponge is digging into the vertical grain. because what will happen is that'll eventually leave sanding marks, and you don't want that. Now, on all the edges, oh, well, like here in the corners too. Can you get in here, hon? So like in the corners here too, with a sanding sponge, because it's nice and flat and square and everything's at a perfect 90, it doesn't take a lot of pressure, so you can get right into the corner. And again, you know, I pre-sand everything, but after I spray my seal coat, it needs to be sanded because the finish raises the grain a little bit, so you need to take those little nubs off. And I tried showing this earlier, but my camera kept messing up and I just couldn't do it. So anyway, so those are a few tips. Again, you know, these cabinets aren't high-end or anything, but they're nice. Let me show you here. Now, the inside has 2 coats because that's all it needs, and then the outer part of the carcass has 3. Now with the stars and stripes, this is the 3rd coat. And you can see that it added a nice depth to it. So you can still see some of the distressing and antiquing and stuff like that, but it adds depth, which is really nice. Now you can see how shiny this is. It hasn't tightened up and dried yet. This is a satin or a semi-gloss finish. Someday I'll make one that's super high gloss, but you can see here on the red-white stripes how it's starting to tighten up and dull down a little bit. And yeah, so after this is all dry, you won't see that high gloss. It'll have a little luster to it, but it'll be more like, that's still pretty shiny. Let's see if I can show you on here. It'll look like that. So anyway, guys, that's this is pretty much done. I just got to assemble it now, and I've got to spray a couple more coats on the shelf that goes inside of it, but that's not quite dry yet. So anyway, there you go. Let me know what you think. Talk to you later.